Yeah, it's getting recorded. Okay, let me share my screen. Hope my screen is visible. So far, we discussed about we started discussion about installation of STS. This is basic tool that we use. Tool which we use to develop Spring Boot microservice applications, or you can use IntelliJ also, or few people will use Visual Code Studio also. Anything should be fine. But STS is the recommended version for Spring Boot. Okay. So hereafter we learn how to create simple Spring Boot application. Just we learn a simple Spring Boot application. Then in next session, we learned how to create simple object. We learned how to create simple object in Java, object in Java using two approaches we learned. Simple using new keyword and class.forName. We learned by using these two approaches how to create object. Then we understand how Spring creating objects using Spring containers. Spring object creation we learned. IOC containers, Bean factory, and application context. How these two containers are creating objects we learned. One is a lazy container and one is early container, and they both can create objects. Object creation by using IOC. Objects by IOC. Your Spring IOC containers. How they are creating objects. And we learned one is lazy and one is early container. It will create early objects. And both are creating by default a singleton objects they are creating. And in the next session, what we learned is how many annotations we have to create objects. Objects will create by IOC anyway. Not like core Java, we use new keyword or class.forName. We go with our Spring IOC containers. They will create object. But when it comes to Spring Boot, you need not to deal with them. By default, Spring Boot internally will initialize application context only. But that is the internal thing. Okay. How Spring Boot will create objects? Just you have to use annotations. In Spring Boot, whenever you want to create object, Spring Boot, whenever you want to create objects, we have to use annotations on top of our bean classes. Controller annotation or REST controller. Service for business classes and a repository for DAO classes, component for any utility classes, configuration for your configuration classes, and @bean, whichever configuration you are doing to that particular method. Right? And we learned about request body. Okay, this is not part of bean creation. Okay, we will just ignore it. We have REST controller, REST controller, service repository. Here we have one more annotation. People generally, they don't deal with it. We will check it, okay? REST repository also is there. We will check what it will do. REST repository, one more stereotype annotation is there, okay? So we have to use these annotations to create object to our bean classes, whichever objects you want to create for your classes. You have to put these annotations on top of your class so that Spring automatically will create objects. How Spring will create objects automatically? So here this concept, okay, this auto object creation will deal by component scanning concept. Okay, so basically there is a concept called component scan. Using this component scan feature, using this component scan feature, at the rate Spring Boot application will do this job. At the rate Spring Boot application will do this job. Okay, so this is a new approach. I mean Spring Boot approach. In Spring Boot using component scan feature, at the rate Spring Boot application is capable to read all your class and create object. How it was handled in old Spring concepts, I'll explain first. Okay, so that it will be simple to you. Okay, let's imagine, okay, the concept name, I call it as auto object creation. Let me save this slide. Daily we can update here, okay? So we learned that objects will create by IOC when we configure them into XML file. That is the first approach we learned. Objects will created when we load them into IOC container via Spring XML file. So here is my class, something student class. If I configure this student class into XML file using bean tag, if I configure it into bean tag, student, and load this it into application context or bean factory. Am I a developer? I am loading it. Okay. So while you are programming it, you will write all your classes. You will write all your classes as a developer. You create packages and you write all the classes here. So developer will create all his required classes, student, employee, whatever it is, controllers, services, whichever classes he want, he will create here. Utilities, all his classes, he or she will configure into this XML file using this bean tag. Using this bean tag, he or she will configure his classes first into Spring XML file. And he will load it into application context. He will load it into application context. And when you start this application context, automatically it will read your Spring XML file. Whatever configurations you have done in this XML file, for all that bean classes, it will create objects. No doubt. But this is a kind of manual job every time you need to do. Every time you need to do manually all these bean configurations here, and you need to load it into application context. Okay, if you miss any configuration, right, you will get, okay, this is time taking process in the manual approach, right? Manual configuration, manually you are configuring. The problems here with the manual configuration is time taking, and sensitive also, right? Sensitive. If you miss any tag also, it will shout, it will give exceptions. Man, this XML is not good. You did something wrong. So time taking and sensitive. XML is sensitive. So if you miss any tags also, it will give errors. Okay. And if I miss any bean configuration, if I miss any bean configuration, I may get dependency errors. I may get dependency errors, right? It will say there is a dependency on the so-and-so class, but you didn't configure it. So that entire application is down, or entire application I enable to start. So you should properly configure all the classes. If you miss even single class which is having dependency, right, it will start creating errors. You have missed one dependency, you need to configure it. Otherwise, I cannot start application. So such a sensitive manual configuration is. So carefully you need to create your classes. You have to go to XML and you need to do all this job manually. Okay. So to avoid this, right, to avoid this bottleneck, to avoid this issue, okay, to avoid these problems, what they did, they made it some kind of automated. They made it some kind of automated by avoiding XML file. Okay. In the Spring 3x itself, in Spring 3x version itself, before Spring Boot itself, we have this automated way of objects creation. So instead of doing manual configuration, they suggested to configure annotations here. Use stereotypes to avoid these issues, to avoid these, to avoid these. Spring 3x came with stereotype annotations concept. Stereotype annotations. To avoid this, Spring 3x came up with stereotype annotations. Stereotypes means a particular annotation to a particular class based on its requirement. Okay. Stereotyping based on your need, they given a specific annotation based on your need. Sir, I want to implement controller. Okay. There is a controller annotation. Service, there is a service annotation. DAO, there is a repository annotation. I want to write some extra classes, utilities. Okay, component annotation. I want to do configurations. Okay, configuration annotation with @bean. So like that, they given stereotype annotations for each type of class. Okay, for each type of class, how we can identify which type my class is. As per MVC, when there is a requirement, right? You will have UI with all front-end components. Then you will be writing backend. In the backend, right? As per MVC, you will write controller, service, repository, some utility classes, some configuration classes, right? So for all these, they given annotations. Sir, mine is controller. So you can put @controller annotation. For controllers, they given controller. You can put simple controller or REST controller. If it is a REST API, we can go with REST controller. And for service, sir, I want to implement business logic. Okay, no problem. Use @service annotation. Sir, I want to implement repositories, means DAOs. Use repository annotation. Some extra utility classes I want to add. So use something mail related implementations I did or validations related, something extra functionality I need to implement. Okay. So some utilities I want to implement. So use @component. Sir, I want to do connection pool kind of configurations. So go with the configuration. Sir, I want to add connection pool in this class. Use @bean and implement your connection pool here on a particular method. So this is how we use all these stereotypes. Just a minute, Madhu. So here we have controller or REST controller, depending on your use case. Simple web controller. If it is a REST application, REST controller. For business code, service. For DAOs, repository. For configurations, @configuration with the bean. For utilities, component. So these stereotype annotations they have given to avoid the manual way of configuring them into XML file and loading it. So if you go with that annotations, you need not to configure them into XML file, all your classes. You can avoid that. You can avoid that. And how my application context can read them, sir? I have a lot of packages and lot of classes. How my IOC container recognize them, sir? Yes, to recognize in which path they are, to recognize in which path they are, in Spring XML file, we will give the path only. We'll just give package name, that's it. So that your application context will go to that package and it will read all your classes. Okay, how we automate it? How we automate it means you will be having a lot of classes in your application. You will be having a lot of classes in your application with the different packages. As I said, right, there will be one main root package, com.icici. If I consider this is my root package, under this root package, I can have so many packages. I can have icici.web, service for my business classes, repository or DAO for my DAO classes, entity for my entity classes, DTOs for my DTO classes, utils for my utility classes, whatnot. You can put any number of packages and inside your root package. So this is my root package. Under this root package, I can have n number of classes. In each package, you know that you can have any number of classes. So I have a lot of classes are here. How IOC is going to recognize them. Okay. Inside this packages, whichever classes you write, use stereotypes. Use stereotype annotations on your classes. On your classes. Use stereotype annotations on your classes. What next? If you use stereotype annotations on your classes, what you should do in Spring XML file, if you see any old application, right? If you see any old application which is using 3x or 4x before Spring Boot, maybe in 2015, 16, 17 around. Here we used to have one tag called context. There is a namespace called context. Using that namespace context colon component scan space base package is equal to, in XML file, we used to do this configuration. Nowadays in Spring Boot, you don't see any XML file. You may surprising how it is handling. So this is the way that earlier we used to do before Spring Boot. Here we used to give our root package com.icici dot star, which means all the classes inside this root package. Inside this ICICI root package, whichever sub packages or whichever classes you have, all that classes are going to be scanned using this component scan. When this scan will perform, when you load your XML file into application context. When you load it into your application context. When you load them into your application context. When you load via your XML file, and when you start your application context, it is going to read. What it will do immediately when you load XML file, it will recognize, okay, he did some component scanning. So application context will go and scan. It will read all your packages. It will read all your packages. And if it find any classes with the stereotype annotations, if it find any classes, right, with these annotations, if it find controller or service or configuration repository components, it will register all of them. Okay. It will get all that class names and it will note. Then it will start creating objects to them. Earlier, I used to configure manually, that I avoided. Spring will go, Spring application context will go to my packages. It will read all of the classes. Then it will start creating objects. Yeah. Go ahead, Madhu.
Yeah, I think I got my answer. So I'm just looking like how the Spring Boot will identify if it is a service or a repo. Yeah, I'm good there. And also, like, can you explain the difference between controller and REST controller?
Yeah. So we are, we need to go, till there. We have long time to go there. Okay. We will
Okay.
discuss in the web discussion. Okay. So
Sure.
very in detail, we will go through each annotation later. But for now, we have to understand how this component scanning concept is working. Okay. So when we want to avoid this manual way of bean configurations in the XML file, okay, to avoid this problem, actually, Spring thought of, bring this concept. Spring thought of make this concept simple to the developers so that they need not to bother about configuring bean classes in Spring XML file. Instead, application context will go and collect all the classes and it will create objects to them. But you should not forget to put stereotype. Still today, I will see people used to forget keep stereotype classes and they will start running application. Then they used to see dependency errors. So the dependency error clearly says, hey man, you have DTO or you have repository dependency in service that is not auto-wired properly. So immediately you should, get into your mind that, okay, I must have forget to put stereotype annotation on, on that particular class. You should visit that class and you should check. Each class must should have that stereotypes. Otherwise, objects will not be created. Yes, Manish.
So the stereotype, the annotation is mandatory for the classes that we're writing. And
Exactly. If you
right,
want Spring to create object, those are mandatory. Sir,
right,
I
right,
don't have any requirement that Spring no need to create object. I just created it for a special purpose. Then it's your class. It's your class.
right.
You need to deal with your class alone.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
So if you
And
want to create object by Spring, let's keep stereotypes.
right. And then the way we are naming the packages, is there some sort of mandate over there also, or it
No, no,
can be
no. Packages, it's your wish. Generally, this is how we follow. Web package for services, controllers, service package for business, repo for DAOs. People will change it. Some people, instead of using web, they will put controller. For service, some people will use business. For repo, some people will use DAO. Okay. So any sort of naming convention you can follow, but those are the annotations that we need to use. Okay. But the main root package should be same. Okay. The root, if you see here, for all these child packages, root is common. Generally, people, will try to create different root packages. Then they will see errors that why that classes are not loading. If you have many root packages, okay, you need to put them with comma separated values here. When you have many root packages, right? You need to configure that many root package names here with comma separated values. Okay. Then only it can pick up all the classes. Okay. Yeah. So what will happen, sir, when I load it into application context and start? When you start this application context, when you start it, okay, I'm starting it. When you start it, what will happen for all these classes, whichever classes you have configured, for all that classes, application context is going to create objects in your JVM. End of the day, all your objects part of JVM. So all your controller objects. Sir, I have a controller object, service object, DAO object, utilities objects, whichever number of classes you have. For all that classes, objects will be created into your JVM. Okay. So it will create objects. That's it. It will fire and forget. No, it will create them and it will hold that object's references with application context. Application context will maintain all these references. It will hold that references into one map object. Internal application context will hold them into a map or list object. Okay. Application context will keep them references here. I have a controller, so it will create one controller reference, or your object references. For each object, one reference it will create. Controller reference, service reference, DAO reference. For each object, it will create one reference variable to application context. And it will hold object in that reference. If it is a controller object, controller service references. Why? Because whenever you want those objects, right? Whenever you need these objects, when you ask application context, how you will ask? Using either reference or class name. By using your class name or by using your reference, you should request for those objects. When you ask application context, okay, application context, you created objects, but if I need that object, right? If you need any object anywhere, you should able to collect it. So from these references, by using these references, you can able to collect it. Whichever objects it created into JVM, those object references it will hold so that you can use that object reference and collect it. Which means once application context object is created, we need to get the object, right? GetBean method is there. Using this getBean method, how I can get this objects or whichever is created? Either you should give class name, your class, class name dot class, your class name dot class, or reference. The reference of your class name. The reference of your class name. So in case of manual configuration, references we give. This references we give in XML file. Bean ID, we use bean ID tag to configure these references. Bean class and ID we use. Using that ID, we give references here. Something std. So this is the reference variable that we use here. Std something if you put here, then it will give the bean. But when you do automatic object creation, we don't give any IDs here. Even we don't configure any classes here. We didn't configure any class here. Automatically, it is going to create object with the default references. It will maintain default references. It will maintain default references for your bean classes. It will maintain default references. Okay. In case if you want to get object, as you don't know the reference, you can use this getBean method. Just give class name, it will deliver you object. If you give getBean method, it can give you object. Okay. GetBean with reference we can use in case of manual configuration. But when you do this automatic scanning and when it create objects, right, you may not find these references names directly. Okay. You may not able to see them, so that you can go with ap.getBean, application context.getBean, give class name dot class so that it will give that particular class object. Okay. I'll show you that old approach. Okay. So that you will get the confidence. So if you go to our blog, right, you can see this XML file, concept example. Where is this blog? Do you have that blog link? Can someone share here? Just a minute. Can someone share that? For examples, I given one link, right? It is not coming here, maybe in different browser. Let me get it. Okay. Here you go. Stereotype examples I given almost lot of examples you have here. Okay. If you want to play around with them. Stereotype auto object creation series. Example 19. Download it. Stereotype. Extract this. Just let me import it. I don't know why it is taking this much time today. Hmm. Do you all installed Spring Tool Suite in Java? Everything ready?
I did.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll share these examples today. Okay, through a drive link. Um, you can download from there. Okay. So try to practice them. If you see any issues, let me know. I'm importing it. Import. This is not Maven project. Okay. Import it as a general project. Use general existing project. Okay. This is the stereotype example. So here I created many classes. Let me add jar files first, as this is not a Maven project, right? Let me add them manually. Okay. So here, if you see web package I created, something a controller, simple controller class. With @ controller annotation and business classes with @service, DAO with @repository, utility, here you can put @configuration. I'll create a separate example, but you can see using context :component scan, we scan them. As I don't have any designated root package, each and every package I'm configuring it here. This is not right way. Okay, let me create a, that was a basic example. Let me create another project. Simple Java project, XML based stereotypes. Go to build path, configure build path. Add external jars. I'll create few packages here. Web, service, repo, utilities. Hey, so- and one more config. So here in web, where is my web? I lost. So in web, you can use either controller or REST controller. I'll create two classes, okay? Something registration controller, use @controller annotation. Okay, controller object. See how automatically it will create, we will see. Okay, as of now, I have only one single class. Let me configure that class into my XML file. Directly, I need not to configure. I'll just keep component scan here. What happened? Okay. Okay, I got resource here. Open this XML file. So this is something lengthy XML namespace you need to configure in XML file. And thereafter context colon component scan base package. You need to give a root package name here, com.icici dot star. Then you can load it into this it into your IOC container. So main method class I'm creating here with main method application context AP equal to new class path XML application context. Load here your XML file resources slash test.xml. Okay. So this XML getting loaded into this one. While loading this, it will scan these packages. If it find any class, it will create objects to them. So let's run this. File not found. Resources test.xml not able to find, it is saying. I think it is copied on project level. Okay, now it came here. Okay. Registration controller object got created here. If you see, your object got created. How? I have not even configured this class name here. In general, we used to configure this way: bean ID, controller class name. If it is a manual approach, this is how we need to put every step. ICICI dot web dot reg controller. I have to do all this. I have to do all this stuff to create the object. But this is completely avoided. This is completely avoided. When you use this context component scan, and when you keep your package name here, it will load all the classes from your packages. It will load all the classes from your packages and it will create objects to them for your application context. Got it? So now let's create few more classes. Okay, I understand now, sir. Whatever you are telling is, if I put stereotype annotation on top of my class, when I load this XML file, which is having the package name, root package name, when I load it into my application context, it is reading this class and it is creating object. Yes. So now let's create few more classes. Registration controller, service package. Here itself, I'll write one more class, registration controller 2 with a different annotation. REST controller I will use here. Okay, maybe the jar file for REST controller jar is not there. It's okay. Okay, we'll see in Spring Boot application. Just leave it. For this one also, I'll put @controller. And I'll write a service here, @service for my business class. Registration service. Put @service. For configurations, right? Connection pool configurations, REST template configurations, lot of configurations we need to do during application, right? So application configuration, something you can create with @configuration. One important annotation you should not miss while doing this. Configuration, right? Importantly, we will use @bean. Any bean whichever you want to create. Okay. So I want to just create a date and return it. You can use it. Okay, this is very, very important combination of configuration and bean. I'll explain this. Okay, one discussion we will have only for these two annotations. Okay, and util. Something validation util. For utility classes, you can go with @component. Okay. Now here are my classes: controllers, utilities, business, DAO, configurations. As a developer, I have implemented my classes. I need not to go to this XML and do any configurations. If I don't have component scan, here I should configure all the classes. But now you need not to do them. Just you implemented your classes, bus, enough. You start your application. You should able to get the objects, unable to make protected final Java class. App config. What happened to you? Configuration @b. Hey, something crazy error. Let's read it. Unable to make protected final Java class loader define class bytes protected domain. Unable to load java.lang. What happened to you? It worked right. For the first class, it worked. What happened now? Unable to make protected final class loader issue getting reflections internally using, I told you, right? Class.forName it will use. Cannot load configuration class. Let me change the JDK version to 11. Or let me see what JDK versions I have. Program files, Java, JDK 1.8, finish. Okay. Hmm. Okay. So that's a kind of JDK issue that was not compatible. Again, I added 1.8. It is working. Okay, you can see configuration, DAO, service, validation util, controller 1, controller 2, and date bean. All objects got created. So instead of struggling manually as a developer, I need not to do all this stuff. So I avoided all the beans configuration here. I can write thousands of classes here. Need not to worry. Automatically, automatically it will scan by using this component scan. It will scan all your packages, whichever classes mentioned the stereotype annotations, all the classes objects it will create. Okay, objects are created, sir. How I can get them? We understand it. Okay, you configured all the classes and you created them. But if I need any object, how I can collect? How to get it? You need to use getBean and you have to give class name here. I need registration controller, so that you need to give registration controller dot class. So it can give you controller object. It can give you controller object. Same, whichever object you want, you can mention that class name, registration controller, registration service. Registration DAO. You can collect all the objects, whichever you require. You need date object, right? So there is a create bean method that will give you date object also. Let's see. I hope it should give the date bean also. What else we have? Utility classes also, validation util. Configuration, we have app configuration. Generally, do we use this approach to get any objects? Means we never collect objects manually. No need of getting, any object manually. We never collect objects and we utilize them. Okay, we'll do auto wiring approach to connect each object with another. Okay, in next sessions we'll see them. So you can just print them and see. Controller bean, service bean, DAO bean, date object, validation util object, app config object. Whichever objects automatically created, you can collect them. See, all these objects which are created, right? I'm retrieving them. 2 minutes over. Thank you. Yeah. So you clear, right? How it is creating automatically the objects. Are you guys clear? Yes, no.
Yes, no.
Okay. Tomorrow once again we will discuss. Can someone summarize what we discussed in this session? Anyone?
So I'll try.
Yeah.
In the previous example, and when we were creating bins, so in the spring.xml file, right, we used to put all the classes, controller, uh, service, repository classes, entity classes, for everything we used to, separately provide that tag bin ID and then class name. We had to do that, manually plug that every time.
Correct.
So this is kind of, we're only going to use uh, the packages in the name. We're going to plug that in Spring.xml, right? So we component dash scan, equals com.icici dot asterisk. That allows all the classes that fall under those uh, packages. It's going to scan all those packages and it's going to look for all the stereotype, the annotated classes. And for all those annotated classes, using application context, when we load this spring.xml file into that application context, is going to create all those objects.
Exactly. So that is what it is. Okay. That is how it will create objects for all the stereotypes. Okay. Whichever stereotypes mentioned, it will go and scan, it will create objects. That's it. Okay. So hope you all clear, right? These all are simple concepts, okay? But they will give you, great confidence to you once we move to Spring Boot, right? You need not to, scratch your head how they are creating. You can, easily understand how internally it is handling. Okay. Yeah.
At rate bin, एक minute. At rate bin is always needs to use with the method only, not on class.
No, not on class. I'll explain you. That is very important annotation, and that too we use with @configuration only. I'll I'll give you clear explanation. I struggled a lot with @bean. I'll explain.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So hope you all good with this. Okay, XML based configuration with the stereotypes. Okay. So tomorrow I'll give you dependency injection example. We will start dependency injection. It may go for another 3-4 days. Okay, very important. Dependency injections with XML based approach, and then I'll go with annotation based approach. Okay, though we are not going to use XML way, I'll give one example, then I'll go with annotations, like how we learned this thing, right? How complicated configuring bean manually, and how it is easy if I go with stereotypes. Same way auto wiring also will see. That is very important. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you guys. I think other class is going to start in this bridge. I'll upload this video and share it with you across. Okay. Thank you all. See you tomorrow. Till then, have a good day.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.